This podcast brought to you by Hope 1032. This podcast brought to you by Hope 1032.
The Hope Book Club with Katrina Rowe and Natasha Moore, because life's just better with a book.
Welcome to the Hope Book Club with Katrina Rowe and Natasha Moore. In this episode, we look at the latest fiction offering from the author of the super popular The Rosie Project series. Graham Simpson wrote Two Steps Forward with his wife Anne Buste. It's about walking the Camino from France to Spain. I've been reading The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland, a botanically themed Aussie novel about finding your voice after experiencing family and partner violence. And we'll dive deep into our literary inadequacies, confessing those books we feel we should have read but haven't. But first, we discuss Kate Bowler's New York Times best-selling exploration of her own mortality after being diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Here's an excerpt from Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved by Kate Bowler.
One moment, I was a regular person with regular problems. And the next, I was someone with cancer. Before my mind could apprehend it, it was there, swelling to take up every space my imagination could touch. A new and unwanted reality. There was a before, and now there was an after. Time slowed to a pulse. Am I breathing? I wondered. Do I want to? Every day I prayed the same prayer. God, save me. Save me, save me. Oh God, remember my baby boy. Remember my son and my husband before you return me to ashes, before they walk this earth alone. I plead with a God of maybe, who may or may not let me collect more years. It is a God that I love, and a God that breaks my heart. Anyone who has lived in the aftermath of something like this knows that it signifies the arrival of 3 questions, so simple that they seem, in turn, too shallow and too deep. Why? God, are you here? What does this suffering mean? At first, those questions had enormous weight and urgency. I could hear him. I could almost make out an answer. But then it was drowned out by what I've now heard 1,000 times. Everything happens for a reason, or God is writing a better story. Apparently God is also busy going around closing doors and opening windows. He can't get enough of that.
That's Kate Bowler in Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. She's a Christian academic, a wife, and mum with stage 4 colon cancer. So, Natasha, this is a very personal book responding to her struggle with cancer, but she's also got an interesting background that I think informs this work. So who was Kate Bowler before she wrote this book?
Yeah, I think this is, in a way, the thing that makes the book, and this might sound a bit bad, but not just another cancer memoir, you know. Obviously, a lot of people get cancer. A lot of people write about it, and she writes better than most people do, but also there's this extra element of the story for her because she's an academic, she's at Duke Divinity School, and for years she's been working on a movement called the prosperity gospel in America. This kind of religious idea, this kind of strand in Christian thinking where people go, actually, God wants you to have every earthly blessing. He wants you to be rich. He wants you to be healthy. He wants you to have everything that your heart desires. And if you just have enough faith, then you'll get all that. And so she's been, you know, that's not her personal background. She's a Christian, but that's not kind of the sort of church that she worships at. But she's been working on this from an academic perspective and written a book on it and so on. So she's spent a lot of time in these communities and listening to these sorts of messages. And then, of course, when she gets this terrible news that she has, you know, very advanced cancer and that she probably won't survive the year, she has to kind of square that with, you know, these communities that she's been part of and this message of like, well, if you had more faith, maybe like God would make it go away.
Well, if you just hadn't, yeah, look, I've faced that thinking with my brother who with cerebral palsy, you know, which I don't think is really something that people get healed from. I don't know of anyone being healed from it. And again, people constantly tell you, well, if you had enough faith. Yeah.
And one of the things this book is really about is all the super unhelpful things that people say when you're going through stuff. And, that is an example. If you just have more faith, God would fix it. But also the title of the book, that everything happens for a reason. And, she tells the story of a neighbour coming by with a casserole or something and saying to her husband, everything happens for a reason. And he says to her, oh, I'd love to hear it. And she's like, sorry. And he goes, I'd love to hear the reason my wife is dying. And you kind of go, yeah, that one wasn't the best option.
Yeah. So how does her diagnosis affect her, I guess, thinking about ideas about life and that background, as you said, looking at that prosperity gospel idea?
I mean, the thing about this book is that it's not simple. It's very honest. It's very raw. She's very funny and very sassy and sometimes over the top, and but she's very honest about the ways that the person she wants to be going through this experience as opposed to the person she really is. So she kind of wants to be this kind of like brave, loving, heroic cancer patient, and but at times she's just really filled with rage, and at times she's really frustrated, and she kind of navigates that really honestly, which I think is a gift to the reader and potentially to the people around her.
Yeah. And what does it kind of make you think about how we deal with misfortune a lot of the time as a society, I guess, and as a culture?
Yeah, so one of the things that she does a few months after her diagnosis and when she's going through all this treatment, and I should say that Kate Bowler is still alive. She got into an experimental trial, and her diagnosis was, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and she still has the cancer. It's incurable, but she's not terminal. So, she's kind of scan to scan and treatment to treatment. So this is an ongoing thing that she continues to live with. But she wrote an article for the New York Times about, the prosperity gospel and her experience of her cancer diagnosis and so on, which struck a chord, obviously, with a lot of people. She got, loads of email, particularly from people who wanted to tell her exactly why she had cancer or exactly what good could come from it, or and that's not what you'd expect, is it? No. And I think she's just really insightful on actually what's helpful to say to people who are going through really difficult situations and what's not helpful. And I think that's something we need help with, right? Because grief and loss and illness and just pain are things that are common in life. They're universal. Everyone goes through. And we are pretty bad at talking about it when we're going through it, or if other people are going through it. And that's a good life skill to have. Totally.
And often we want to say things that take the pain away, and those are things that try to minimise it, and those things are usually the things that aren't helpful.
Yeah, she talks about a doctor she knows, a good friend of hers, who's a paediatric oncologist, so, works with children who have cancer, and that he came to see her soon after her diagnosis and just kind of sat down and said, I'm so sorry this is happening. This is so awful. And that nobody had really said that everyone wanted to kind of say, oh, I read this research, or at least this, or, don't worry, everything happens for a reason, or God's going to heal you, or whatever people wanted to say. And he really acknowledged this is really awful and kind of sat with that, and that's a really helpful thing to do with people.
Yeah, totally. Well, you definitely do hear that everything happens for a reason mantra, and it's not just, I think, amongst religious circles, but I think it's everywhere. So is that something that I think that you'll be avoiding after reading this book now, Natasha?
Yeah, definitely. I think because sometimes the temptation, right, because it's hard to know what to say to people who are going through such terrible things. And so the temptation is just to avoid them, or just to avoid saying anything about it. And often we do say the wrong thing because it's hard to know what the right thing is. But she has some really helpful suggestions. And I think also just because she's she's quite sassy, quite funny. There's a point where she takes up cursing for Lent, takes up swearing for Lent. You know, like she's not a kind of holier than thou sort of person. And so I think, experiencing that sort of on the inside with her, and then hearing her tips for like, actually, here's how you sit with someone in their pain instead of trying to fix it, which is generally not very helpful. And she actually has, she started a podcast this year called Everything Happens. So without the kind of for a reason, where she interviews people who have kind of been through stuff or who have thought a lot about this sort of thing. And I've just started listening to that, and that's quite, I don't want to say fun, but it is, you know, genuine and helpful.
Okay. So who do you think would enjoy this book?
So like everyone. I think everyone. It's a really easy read, and, you know, she puts a lot of herself in it, and so I think it's accessible for everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Natasha. We've been talking about Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved by Kate Bowler. So let's go on to our next book. The Rosie Project is one of the most beloved Australian novels of the last decade. It spawned a sequel, The Rosie Effect, and a third book, The Rosie Result, is being released next year. There's also a long-awaited movie in development, but in the meantime, Graham Simsian has released a novel with his wife, Anne Buist. It's called 2 Steps Forward, and it's about 2 people independently walking the Camino from France to Spain. Now, firstly, before we talk about 2 Steps Forward, did you love The Rosie Project? Because I loved it, but a lot of my book club didn't. So
you're kidding.
Truly.
Because, you know, The Rosie Project is like a book that I recommend and give to lots of people, including people who are like, oh, I don't really read, or I don't really read fiction. I don't know. I'm like, The Rosie Project. Start here, okay? Everybody. I've had one person, I think, over the last several years who said to me, oh, I didn't really like that book. Everyone else loves it.
I love it. I gave it to my mom. I've given it to lots of people, but for some reason...
It's so fun.
The ladies
it's
in my...
such a joy.
I know. The ladies in my book club didn't like it. Okay. So knowing that you love The Rosie Project, I'm guessing that you came into 2 Steps Forward with rather high expectations. So did it live up to those?
I did have high hopes. I wish I could say that it was just as delightful as The Rosie Project. It kind of wasn't, I'm afraid. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Feel free to read it. But there's something just light and joyful about The Rosie Project and the characters and the kind of absurd things that happen to them.
It's very funny too.
It is. It's hilarious. Yeah. I think this one it doesn't have that same touch. It's not that funny. It's not that joyous.
Okay. So what's it about? Give us the premise.
So it's about 2 particular characters, Zoe and Martin, and, you know, the husband and wife team who wrote it, Graham and Anne, write alternating chapters from the perspective of Martin and Zoe, respectively. So Zoe is an American. They're both middle-aged. They've both kind of been through, she's just lost her husband. He has been through a kind of bitter divorce and has not got a job, and they both wind up in Cluny in France, and they decide for various reasons to walk the Camino, which is, you know, the pilgrim's trail that goes to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And you can do various versions of that. And you probably know someone who's done it because it's very, I don't want to say trendy, like it's, you know, it's always been a popular thing to do and a very meaningful thing for a lot of people, and beautiful walking and so on. So they both decide to do this trail, coming at it from very different angles, very different personalities, and their encounters with each other and their kind of growing, I guess, self-knowledge as well as knowledge of each other as they go.
So you mentioned this technique that, you know, one chapter from him, one chapter from her. Did that work, that technique for you?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Like, I believed both characters' voices, but it did feel a little laboured. And, you know, it was good to have kind of their perspective of each other, having that back and forth. But, you know, yeah, I think the kind of back and forth and back and forth.
You got tiresome to you,
It did a bit.
Yeah, because the other thing, I mean, if you think to the Rosie Project, what makes it really work is just the delightfulness and the quirkiness of the character, you know, like a book like Eleanor Oliphant is completely fun. You know, it's like the characters are kind of strange, but just nice enough to be sort of empathetic enough for you to care about those characters. So does this book have interesting characters, or are they a bit...
No, I think they're much more normal, which, you know, I don't object to. Like, I find normal people interesting as well.
Yeah.
Depending.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I'm not sure they're as likeable as the kind of oddballs. The oddball that you get in the Rosie Project. Don, the narrator in that. So, you know, I think I did appreciate that their development as characters was not kind of in a straight line, as the 2 steps forward title would suggest, I guess. You know,
2 steps forward, one step back. Yeah.
And so it wasn't all as kind of predictable as you think it might be, setting out and being like, oh, these 2 characters and they're going to fall in love. And, you know, like... I'm not saying you're wrong, but but it wasn't as kind of straightforward. There's some zigzagging and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But, you know, I don't think they're characters that stay with you in the same way as Don and Rosie.
Right. So could you recommend 2 steps forward?
I think the thing that I found most interesting about the book was some of the detail of actually walking the Camino, and what that's like. So just kind of the logistics of it, the ins and outs, where you stay, how you decide how far to walk, how painful it is, you know, what you carry, what's worth carrying and not carrying. So I think if you're someone who's interested in that walk and that experience, and maybe you're thinking of doing it yourself, then I think it would be worth giving it a read. Otherwise, not one of my favourites.
Okay. No, that's all right. I'm with Natasha Moore, and we've been talking about 2 Steps Forward by Graham Simpson. Well, Natasha, you don't...
And Anne Buist. Feminist!
You're right, Natasha. Yes, by Graham Simpson and Anne Buist. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. All right, so let's come to confession time here, Natasha. Okay,
Yep.
So I know that we all have these kind of guilty... I guess associations, the books that we feel that we should have read, but that we haven't, and that we probably wouldn't want to put our hand up in public or in our book club or at our writing group and go, oh, I've never read that. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a great David Lodge novel where he kind of writes comic novels about academics, where the academics in the English department play this game called Humiliation, where they have to name a book that they haven't read, and if everyone else has read it, then you get all those points for the number of people. Oh. So if you name something that's kind of obscure and you're like, oh, I've never read, you know, Infinite Jest or something, or, you know, Ulysses or something massive, then people go, oh, well, I've never read it either. And so you don't get any points, but you get your prestige. Okay. Whereas, and there's this one academic who decides to be very competitive about it, and he wants to win. And so he confesses that he's never read Hamlet, and everyone else is very shocked because, you know, they're professors in an English department and everyone else has read Hamlet. And so he wins the game, but then he doesn't get tenure. And it becomes this kind of thing of, it was probably because he's never read Hamlet. They couldn't give him tenure. So this is what I think of when I think of this. Yeah, the books I don't want to admit.
I have to say, I was quite horrified on the plane when I just went to the UK recently to see that they have these kind of cheat courses where you can
talk about books you haven't read.
Yes, it's like they tell you all the details of the book, and so you can pretend you've read it. How bad is that?
It's terrible.
Anyway.
We would never do that.
No. So, okay, I'll go first if you want.
Yep.
The book that I have never read, which I can't believe I haven't read it, but I'm sure I haven't, is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Because we, at school, we did all the Dickens, you know, well, not all, but we did like A Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations and David Copperfield. We didn't do Oliver Twist. And I bought a copy literally probably 20 years ago, and it's sat on my shelf and I still haven't read it.
See, Katrina, I'm not sure it's that shameful. Partly because you're like, oh, I've read all these other Dickens, like these other longer, more difficult Dickens novels, and I studied them at school. I didn't study any Dickens at school.
I just read them as a kid, though. It's not the same as reading it yourself.
See, this is that game of humiliation where you're like, oh, supposedly this is shameful, but actually...
No, it's
that being
not.
said, I have read Oliver Twist.
Because Oliver Twist is the iconic one. We all know Fagin. We know Oliver Twist. I love
Great
Nancy.
Expectations is the iconic one. You've read Great Expectations, haven't you?
I have, yes.
Yeah. I actually read Great Expectations a few years ago because I felt so guilty about not having read it.
Oh, it's pretty great. Okay,
I'm filling in my gaps.
Well, what's your confession?
Well, so I'm going to make more or less the same confession, except that this is more shameful for me because my background is Victorian literature. So I have a PhD in Victorian literature and I've read hardly any Dickens. I feel maybe I shouldn't confess this in public. But
you might lose your
tenure.
tenure.
Lucky I'm out of that game. But yeah, so, I have read Great Expectations and Oliver Twist and a couple of others, but I haven't read David Copperfield, which is the one that, like, Victorianists
It's his favourite.
love. Yeah, it's the most autobiographical.
He loves David.
I actually started to read it, but I was in Illinois in the middle of summer doing kind of a research thing in a library there, and it was like 35 degrees and like 100% humidity every day, and it was bright sunlight. And I started reading David Copperfield, and it was so grey, and I just kind of went, actually, it just doesn't fit where I am. I can't read
I don't need
it.
to be in this place right now.
So I will get back to it at some point.
All right. So over the summer, that can be our challenge to read one Dickens.
One Dickens.
Okay.
I'm going to read David Copperfield.
Okay.
Or A Tale of Two Cities.
A Tale of Two Cities is
no,
great.
I know.
Oh,
yeah, that's what they say.
You've got to read that one.
You.
Yeah. All right. So now it's time for my pick today.
Yes.
So my pick is The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland. It's a botanically themed Australian novel. So what I mean by that is that every chapter has a flower, and it's written in the Victorian tradition of each flower having a specific meaning for your life. So we start with Alice. The story starts with her as a child, and that's one of probably the things that I found more challenging about the book. It covers a very long time span. So it starts when she's a child, and it sort of goes to, I think, mid-adulthood.
Is it a very long book?
Not super long, no. But she lives with a violent father and her mother on an isolated farm. And so basically it starts out with this domestic life, and then her life is lost forever, basically, when there's a fire. And she loses her parents and beloved dog. This is not a spoiler. It's kind of all on the back blurb that this happens. And then she goes to live with the grandmother she never knew she had on a flower farm. And here she meets these women called the Flowers. So other traumatized women have taken refuge there, and together they grow these flowers. It sounds sort of like an idyllic picture of women caring for each other, but it's not as idyllic as it first seems. There are secrets, and there is controlling behaviours, and there's alcoholism and all sorts of other things going on under the surface. The things that happen in those years on the flower farm will have long-term implications for her life. But again, it does go on to bring back that theme of domestic and family violence and of her needing to find her voice. And she kind of uses the language of flowers as a way of finding her voice. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, in the very beginning after the fire, she doesn't speak for a long time. And so the flowers become her way of speaking.
And it sounds like, I'm vibing that maybe there's a parallel between, like, the whole kind of women as flowers and, delicate or not and, flourishing or not. Is that kind of...
There's definitely themes of
subtle?
growth. And, well, the ladies on the farm are literally called the Flowers, and they're all damaged. They've all been hurt by life. And they kind of look after each other. But it's not as I said, it's not as an idyllic environment as it might first seem. So this has got themes of, like, not being in control of your destiny and not taking control of your life, coping with terrible things that happen and sort of regrowth after terrible things that happen, how people can be controlling, the way violence has such long-term flow and impacts on a person's life. I have to say this book got a little bit lost for me around the middle, but it came good at the end, and I just love the botanical themes and learning about the different flowers and the way that Alice kind of starts to take back a little bit of control of her life. So I think it's worth a read.
who should read it?
I have to say it is definitely a book for women. And if the book has a weakness, it's a real lack of good male characters. It features a lot of violent, angry and untrustworthy male characters. And if anything, I sort of felt the book was a bit too feminized for me. I would have liked to see more men in the book and more sort of male responses, I guess, to things. But definitely a book for women. And if you love plants and gardening, or if you yourself are looking for some kind of rebirth or healing in your life, it might be a good book for you to read. What do you reckon, Natasha? Would you pick up a book like that?
I like the flower idea, but otherwise, out of all the books in the world, the big queue of it, not that keen.
No,
sorry.
That's okay. Well, I did really enjoy the Australian setting as well. All right, thanks so much, Natasha. It's been great hanging out with you.
Always a pleasure.
So in this episode of the Hope Book Club, we have been looking at Graham Simsian and Anne Buste's new book, Two Steps Forward. I was reading The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland, and Natasha reviewed Kate Bowler's New York Times best-selling book, Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. Thanks for listening to the Hope Book Club, because life's just better with a book.
Thanks for listening. Start your day with Life Words. Subscribe to Hope 1032's free daily email devotional at hope1032.com.au. Thanks for listening. Start your day with Life Words. Subscribe to Hope 1032's free daily email devotional at hope1032.com.au.